Salut tout le monde! I'm so excited to finally be making this video because this is the Q&A sort of celebration for having hit 1,000 subscribers. So before I get into anything, just a huge thank you to all of you because obviously the 1,000 subscribers is not coming from me, it's coming from all of you. So this is just a very exciting milestone and I'm super happy to be doing a Q&A with you. All of these questions have come from you either on my YouTube community post from a couple of weeks ago or my Instagram post also from a couple of weeks ago. And as promised, I am going to pick 3 people to send a postcard from me from Paris. I couldn't really choose between all the questions. So instead, I have on my laptop an online randomizer and I just put in everybody's name who asked a question and it's going to do the choosing for me. So you will be finding out who's getting a postcard throughout the video. So let's get into it. The first section of questions that I have has to do with Bla Bla Kaity as a channel. So the first question, what made you decide to create this channel? For anyone who doesn't know, I started this channel back in March of this year. And honestly, March was a pretty pivotal moment in my life this past year. I was working through, I think I was in my 3rd year of an Ivy League French PhD program. Pretty much I was doing so much work all of the time that I didn't really have time to focus on myself. And also I was very, very aware of the fact that in several ways I was being exploited. So as part of the PhD program, I also had to teach, and I was teaching, I was an instructor for elementary and intermediate French courses. So I was in charge of teaching a group of students from start to finish every single day, going through a French curriculum. And while I loved that aspect of my job, that was probably my favorite part of the whole program. As an employee, as a grad worker, I was not being at all compensated in ways that I should have been. And I think that because of COVID, because everything was kind of forced to stop, I finally had time to reflect and to really reevaluate what it was I was doing in the program and how I felt as a human being. And there was almost nothing positive about it other than the way that I felt when I was teaching. So by the time March rolled around, I was definitely reevaluating my whole life, and one of my best friends asked me to close my eyes and just visualize I think she said my best and brightest life. And so I did that, and I immediately saw myself teaching, but also being my own boss and living in France. So it was kind of one of those revelations where once you feel it or once you see it, you can't unsee it. So I decided to remove myself from that program. And in that same month, that was when I started applying like crazy to all of the lecteur positions in France. So this lecteur position satisfies my desire to teach and my desire to live in France. But of course, I'm still working for someone else. So I'm not really my own boss. And I think that I saw creating a YouTube channel, which is the first thing that I did for Bla Bla Kaity, as a sort of step in that direction of being my own boss and having my own business. So that kind of leads me into my next question for Bla Bla Kaity, which is, now that I'm in France, what am I going to do with my channel? What is next for Bla Bla Kaity? And I mean, I think that you've noticed there's been like a slight shift in my content because now that I'm actually in France, I can start filming outside. I can actually show you the day-to-day of being in France. So I think that more vloggy content is for sure coming, but I definitely want to hold on to the core idea of helping people with their French language and with moving to France. To that effect, I'm actually in the process of creating some products that I think are going to be very relevant for you. So I'm not going to talk too much about that right now because it's still very much in the development stages, but I'm very excited to release those products when they're ready. And I think that that will be like the next step for Bla Bla Kaity. The next batch of questions have to do with getting to France. So I was asked what inspired me to move to France and have I always envisioned being here? And I would say I haven't always envisioned being here. So when I started learning French in high school, I kind of saw France as like this unattainable dream. So when I was like 12 to 18, I didn't actually think I would ever be able to get to France. Like ever. And it wasn't until I was at university that I realized that there was like a study abroad program that worked seamlessly into the college that I was at, so I wouldn't have to really do much to figure out how to get there. And that was really the first time that I realized like, oh, this is actually a possibility. And I think that after that amazing 4 months in Aix-en-Provence, I realized how much like home France felt to me. I never know how to explain it other than when I'm in France, it just feels like home. So I would say that once I realized that this was actually a possibility and that I could get the skills in order to be like a marketable person here and to have a job here, that was really when I was like, okay, so this is the plan. I want to live in France, period. Of course, to get to France, I have to get on a flight to France, which segues into our next question, which is how bad was it to change your flight? Was it worth buying a flexible ticket and changing rather than a last minute ticket in your case. So for anybody who doesn't know, I initially bought a flight to come to France in the beginning of September because I thought that's when I was going to get here. And then of course, with all the visa issues, that didn't happen until the beginning of October. And so I originally, when I first tried buying that ticket, I wanted to buy a flexible fare ticket, which means that if I were to change the flight, then it wouldn't cost me as much. It wouldn't just be me buying a whole new ticket. My original ticket was $354.20. And so the second ticket overall was like $570-ish. But because I already had paid $350 for the first ticket, I just had to make up the difference. So yeah, I guess I would just say that if you are buying a ticket that you have the option to be flexible fare or not, I would say definitely have it be flexible fare. If, like me, you're in a situation where your ability to enter the country depends on factors out of your control. The factor for me that was out of my control was, of course, the visa, which links to the next question. Have you met others going through the visa application, and how are they different, accepted, or denied? So I have pretty much only met other people who have gone through the visa application process to be a lecteur or to do tapis. I don't really think anybody had a particularly easy time getting their visa, but it seemed like a lot of people in tapis got their visas before people trying to go as a lecteur or lectrice, and I have not heard from anybody who got denied. Of course, I'm speaking from the American experience, and there's already a lot of privilege that goes into being a US citizen who's applying to go to the EU. So those are the first 5 questions. Now I'm just gonna look at the randomizer really quickly to see who the first person is to get the postcard. So let's see. I have everybody's name in the randomizer. I double checked, I triple checked to make sure I have all the names. Okay, and the first person is Laura. Okay, Laura. So I'm not going to say anybody's last name, but Laura, you are the first postcard winner. So the next batch of question has to do with being a lectrice d'anglais, and the first is, what are your first impressions of being a lectrice, and is it how you imagined it would be? So it's kind of hard to say, mostly because every week leading up to the start of this job, I was mostly focusing all of my energy on the visa issues that I was having. And then once I arrived here, I had, I think, 2 days before I jumped right into action. And since then, I have not had a break until literally this past week, because I've had a week of vacation. And this is really the first time that I've been able to just kind of sit and be like, oh, I'm in Paris. And so I guess I can't really say anything to whether or not this met my expectations, because I kind of am just living it. But I would say that so far I really do enjoy it. Luckily, I have so many great classes that a lot of times I will leave the room and I'll just have this huge smile on my face that of course no one can see because of the mask. But I guess maybe that's the next thing that I kind of noticed, that while I'm so grateful to be teaching in person again, because during the pandemic I taught online and that had its own string of challenges, but it's great to be teaching in person, but it's also so difficult with everybody wearing masks. And this is not an argument for people to not wear masks. I understand the importance of that and I'm fully behind it. But sometimes someone will say something and I'll just look all over and be like, who said that? Because it's just a sea of masks staring back at me. Or I'll be making eye contact with one person thinking that they're talking and really it's like the person next to them, and that's always fun. But so far so good. I am very happy to be back in the classroom and feel very blessed with a ton of students that I have been able to teach. Oh, and the next question is, did you always envision yourself becoming a lectrice d'anglais? And the short answer is no, I did not. But that is mostly because I didn't even know that this position existed until 2 or 3 years ago. So that is all for the questions on being a lectrice. And now we're going to talk a little more in general about living in Paris or living in France. The first question is asking, have I thought about what places I'm going to visit while I'm on the holidays or during the weekends? And to be perfectly honest, because getting here was so rushed and because I had to start teaching immediately, I really have not had much time to actually pin down what it is I want to be doing or where it is I want to be going. I think that also just with the anxiety that's been kicking in a little recently, like I talked about in my last video, I definitely want to make sure that I'm feeling 100% comfortable just where I'm living in Paris before I really think about branching out. But that is very much on my to-do list. I do want to for sure prioritize making sure that I'm getting out of Paris. The next question is a little similar, but what places are you excited to visit in France when you have the chance? And like I said, I don't have it pinned down yet, but I know that I for sure want to go back to the places that I used to live in. So I want to go back to Aix-en-Provence. I want to go back to the town that I lived in near Nantes. The next 2 questions are kind of linked, so I'm going to answer them together. But what's your favorite thing about living in France so far? And while you're not teaching, what is your favorite pastime in Paris? Okay, Favorite thing about living in France so far? I literally can't answer this because there's just so many things. I'm so happy to be in a city where I can walk everywhere and have a reason to go places. I'm happy to be teaching in person again. I'm happy to be speaking French and listening to French. And I'm happy to be surrounded by people who read books on the metro. And I'm happy to be close to all these boulangeries with incredible croissants. There's so many things I love about being here that I can't really pick out one favorite thing. And so when I'm not teaching, my favorite pastime in Paris, this might be a really boring response, but I found that I really just like being a part of the fabric of the city. I really like walking around and not even necessarily going somewhere. I just like taking a stroll in my surrounding area. I like taking the metro to wherever. I like reading on benches. Like, it's very anything that will just kind of have me be a background character in the painting of Paris. I don't know if that's like the best metaphor, but I'm really just happy to be a part of what's going on here. And the next question, I unfortunately, again, I don't think I can answer this. I can't really do it justice, but what are some of your favorite neighborhoods in Paris? So for example, if a friend were visiting, where would you tell them to hang out other than the touristy spots? This is where I'm useless because prior to my experience here in the past month of living in Paris, I've only ever been to Paris visiting on weekends, and therefore I was only ever going to the touristy spots. So in the past month of me being here, I really have only been going from where I work to where I live and just trying to get into a rhythm that has me feeling like I have a handle on my life. So I think that this is something that I will have to do like a whole other video on once I have more time and have made it more of an intentional thing to go out and find all these different neighborhoods. So on that note, we're going to take a quick pause and I'm going to pick I'm going to have the randomizer choose the second person to get a postcard. Okay. And it is Madeleine. Madeleine, I think that you contacted me on YouTube. I don't know if we've spoken on Instagram yet, but we will get in contact and you will be getting a postcard from Paris from. So that is the second person. And now we're still in the same section. There's just a lot of questions for this one. So along the vein of living in Paris and France, what are the best and worst parts of living alone in a foreign country? And specifically, what were my struggles the first time? I think that in general, the best part is learning things about yourself that you never would have learned otherwise, or kind of pushing yourself past the boundaries that you never thought would have been possible. And to give you a concrete example, it's just kind of like every single everyday activity is going to be a challenge for the first few times that you do it. And it's literally just because you're abroad. The first time that I was using my washing machine, I realized, oh crap, I don't actually know how this works. And it took me a good 30 minutes just to figure out how to use it. And also, for example, when I'm cooking, if I have recipes that are in English, I have to do all of the translation in terms of the measurements. And I have to also do translations of ingredients so that I can go and get the right stuff. And so no matter how small the task is, you are being pushed or challenged in some way, and it makes the completion of these tasks that much more rewarding. You really do feel like you're growing every single day because you're doing new things, oftentimes in a foreign language and in a new place. I think the worst part is probably that it can get lonely. I actually had a breakdown the other day because I was just thinking about my family, and in the past, whenever I moved to France, it was always, there was an end date. So study abroad, end of the semester, and tapif, end of the 7 months. But this is really the first time that I am trying to stay here long term. And so I had this realization the other day where I was like, wow, I am very far from my family, and it is always going to be like this. Like, to see each other, one of us is going to have to get onto a flight, and that is no small task, both financially and physically and all the other illies. So yeah, sometimes that can be really, really hard to realize that the whole life that you had back home is not coming with you. So yeah. Oh, and I guess, yeah, so the struggles the first time that I moved here, that would be different from being lonely, because like I said, the first time that I moved here, I was doing study abroad. I knew that there was an end date. I was going to be home for the holidays. Like, there was no question about really being homesick in a way. But I think that my struggle the first time, if I can think back to that, what was it? Yeah, so I think that my biggest struggle the first time was actually staying way too much in my little bubble comfort zone. So when I was studying abroad, it was at an American university in Aix-en-Provence. And so all of the students that I was talking to were American, and we all spoke in English, obviously, even though all my classes were in French. And I ended up becoming part of this incredible friend group. We just were always together all the time. As incredible as that friend group was, and as amazing of a time that I had that semester, I definitely did not integrate myself into the community that I was living as much as I could have. So I didn't have any French friends. I was not doing anything that would have me speaking French other than when I was in class or talking to my host mom. And I don't know how to explain it other than it just felt like I was living in an American bubble within an incredible backdrop of Aix-en-Provence. And so, yeah, I think that was probably, in hindsight, that was my biggest struggle. And so in terms of not having any French friends when I was studying abroad, the next question is, what advice do you have for befriending French people? So honestly, I would say when you think of befriending people, it's always because there's a common interest. For example, I can't come to Paris and just make French friends because I want to have friends with whom I can speak French. Because at the end of the day, if I don't find a common interest with them, the conversation's gonna run out. It's not really gonna be enjoyable to hang out with each other. So when you think about it, you really just have to put yourself out there in terms of, like, for example, if you're at a university, join some clubs that you actually are interested in doing. Or if you're religious, actually go in person if you can to the service or whatever it is that you call it and try to meet people that way. Something else that you can do, and this is something I am planning on doing once I have maybe a little bit more time here, is going on meetups.com, because that is where you specifically find a group of people who are doing something that you enjoy. So yeah, those are my examples for that. And the last question for this section, if you don't speak French in France, is it particularly difficult to get by? This is really going to depend on where it is you're in France, because for example, now in Paris, if I needed to, I could find somebody who speaks English. However, if you are in more of a rural area or a smaller area, for example, where I was living during Tapif, the only other people in the town that I was living who spoke English were my English teacher colleagues. In every other scenario, I had to speak French. So I would highly recommend that if you are coming to France, learn at least the bare minimum. Hello, thank you. Where is the, do you speak English? You really don't want to come in assuming that somebody is going to speak English, because at the end of the day, that's not the language of France. And so it's really important just to make an effort to at least start in French and keep your fingers crossed from there. The next question is the only one I got for French language, and it's asking for tips for improving spoken French. Specifically, this person has built up a good amount of vocab and can say most words correctly, but it still feels awkward at times, especially when reading aloud. Yes, I am so familiar with the awkwardness sometimes of speaking French. But I will say, for pronunciation, what you can do is, I think it's called echoing or shadowing, but if you're watching somebody on YouTube or on Netflix, or if you're listening to a podcast, repeat what the person is saying after they say it. It is super helpful to make sure you're getting as accurate of a pronunciation as you can, and also record yourself so that you can hear it back, because sometimes when I'm speaking French, I'm like, wow, that was so good. And then I listen back to the recording and I'm like, oh man, that wasn't as good as I thought. And in terms of spoken French, I would give somewhat similar advice. I would just say, try to record yourself as much as you can. You really have to put in the work to actively find the errors, and also actively listen to what other people are saying so that you can kind of mimic their speech. And the final two questions have to do with what's next. So you mentioned that you can only hold this position, being a lectrice, for 2 years. Have you considered what you want to do after? Thoughtful question. I would say I have considered what I want to do after, but the way that I kind of live my life, and this is something I realized after reflecting on this question, is that I never really know 100% what I'm gonna do next until I'm doing it. Probably would continue doing something with teaching or with translation. I don't really know. I think that this time next year, I'm definitely going to have a much more concrete idea of the different paths that I have that I'm working towards. But as of right now, I 100% want to stay in France, and it's just a matter of figuring out how. So the very last question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I still definitely see myself in France. If not in France, definitely not the United States. And I want this to become my full-time thing. I don't necessarily know if I'm talking about YouTube, but just Bla Bla Kaity, I want to be my full-time job. And then whatever it is I have to do to stay in France, if I don't have citizenship at that point yet, I want to be doing that too. I want to be, in La France. So now this leads us to our third and final postcard person. All right. And the third winner is Enigmatic Learning. So I also think that we have talked on Instagram. I will try to get on sending you the postcards as soon as possible. Thank you so much to everybody who has subscribed to the channel, who has asked me questions. I feel so freaking blessed. And I really think that that's all for this video. So à la prochaine.